All right, well, it's 11, so I'm going to say good morning to everyone. I'm Carla, I'm the marketing manager here at Fuse Forward, and I'd like to welcome you to the very first episode of our new webinar series, Remote Control. So this series is designed to take a quick deep dive on technical challenges that we are going through at this time, particularly as many of us rapidly transition to the delivery of online services. And on that note, this is the very first of our webinar, so you might have to bear with us just as we get to grips with this, but it should be fine. So I know we're all pressed for time these days, so the key of this series is that it's quick. We don't want to take your time. We want to give you answers to questions you have, but we will still be taking questions from you. So if you look at the Q&A button down below, if you have questions and you want to post them in there, I'll be monitoring them throughout the discussion, and if we don't get to them during the session, we'll discuss afterwards. So today we have Mark Dam, our founder and CTO, on the call, and he is a skilled system architect with over 30 years experience in enterprise and public sector. And so today he's going to be drawing on some of that experience to talk about data residency concerns in relation to a remote workforce. So I'm going to hand over to him now, and I'll be switching my camera off for a second. And so,
but you have a nice background, Carla.
Yeah, I did a bit of cleaning in the house today. Probably like most of you, we're all remote working from home. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you're all getting it. We're in Vancouver, and I was hearing today that we actually had snow coming down. And I'm like, how do you get snow when it's +5 outside? It's supposed to be nice and warm here, but we seem to be getting a little bit of a stretch of winter. Anyways, we're all home workers. For a lot of us in the technology world, I think we've all been working from home or working remotely and able to go through and use our technology as we do that. But there's been a lot of changes coming about. Now the whole world seems like it's caught on to this whole world of remote work, and when we're starting to do that, there's been a huge uptick in starting to use new forms of online cloud services like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and other types of technologies, Amazon Chime, conferencing technologies, collaboration technologies, and being able to use these new applications. Some of the challenges I want to go through today is share with you a little bit on what we see and what's important, some things that you might want to consider as you go forward and start using this. We're intending this to be a very short little presentation, more of an interactive Q&A session as we go. So please feel free to jump in, provide some comments and questions as you go along. And let's see if we can jump in right now and consider some of the things that you want to consider as you're doing remote work and when you're starting to look at data residency within the realm of the regulatory compliance issues that governments and businesses have. So what's important? I always break down data residency and remote work into two primary areas: regulatory compliance and technical requirements. So what are some of the things that we have that we've got to consider when we're dealing with things like regulatory compliance? So we've got to look at it, and everybody may have heard about GDPR. It's a European legislation, which is all about helping to protect the privacy of people's information and asking for consent to go through and share information. We've seen Cambridge Analytics linking in the scandal that happened and incorporated Facebook, and the fact that lots and lots of organizations are grabbing information about their individuals that are using their services, and then they're sharing that data and not knowing it. I know of a company in the United States as an example. They go through and create coupons, and coupons when you're at a grocery store, and they have profiles of 350 million Americans. Every time you use a debit card, a credit card, they go through and they create a profile around you, not with your name, but with a credit card or a debit card ID attached to it. They anonymize it, but from that they're able to go and look at your buyer behavior. Now, when you're thinking about that, as soon as you go in and you're using a service in the United States, you are no longer subject. You're basically providing them with access to your data, even if you're a Canadian resident or if you're a European resident. Now, a lot of them are depending upon corporations saying, hey, I am meeting those requirements, but there's always concerns when government entities are incorporating these kind of remote tools into their services. Are the services there then meeting the compliance requirements that they have within their incorporated jurisdiction? So let's take something like the Government of Canada or a Government of Ontario. If you're a company that's incorporated in one of those entities, you're subject, and you have an office, you're subject to the rules of that country. Now, British Columbia in Canada is one of the provinces that have some of the highest security requirements and personal private information acts in Canada, and they very closely align with those of the GDP of the European Union. In addition, and a lot of what they have is they have requirements to keep data within Canada. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between metadata and user data, which is related to purchasing and billing of the services, as well as the customer content. And I'll share with you a little things that you need to consider along that. Another very interesting thing that you want to think about is, what about industry regulations like the Health Information Act? I know of doctors that were using email services called Google Mail and Gmail, and they were basically using it as part of their means to get access and share their information and store their notes. Well, Gmail is actually in the United States, and their servers were down in the States. That means that they were taking data that was healthcare related and shipping it down into the US, and that's not allowed under the regulations. So, but they didn't even know they were doing that. But just because they're using a service called Gmail, unless you know where the servers are, where they're storing data, you don't know whether you're in compliance related to HIPAA requirements. Then, if you remember back, we had this thing called the Patriot Act. And what the Patriot Act in the US says as an example is that the American government can intercept any data and that crosses its borders, and they can inspect it. And those are the things that do happen. So part of the things that you have whenever you're dealing with the regulations is you're trying to determine exactly what regulations affect me, what do I need to be compliant with, what am I allowed to do when I'm contacting people, do I need consent? Those are all the things that you need to think about when you are dealing with data residency issues in this new world. When we start doing remote work, we also then start thinking about some of the technical requirements. For example, if we're dealing with an application and we want to start using it, are we using our home PCs? Do we have enough speed to actually run those applications? When we're accessing those applications, are they secure? So are we putting in and are we linking into our business networks? And when we're doing that, are we potentially using our home computers, and are we linking in our home computers with a USB card and potentially infecting a business network with something that's on our home computer system? The other things that we need to think about with remote work is, what about data security? What is actually stored on desktops? Are we allowing third parties into our network south of the border or from Asia or wherever they're coming from? And then for the applications that we typically run on premise, when we're sitting on a network on our business network, we're usually on a very high-speed network, and we're very close to the applications and the application servers. Will they work across the cloud? Do we need any sort of remote desktop technology to help us improve application performance? Those are some of the things that I think about when I start thinking about remote work and when I start thinking about the data residency requirements associated with remote workers accessing our business systems. So what's changed? We've got this COVID issue that has emerged, and what has changed in the last close to 72 or even the last 5 days is that a number of the agencies that have been pushing now to go and contain and maintain data privacy and data rules within it, and basically have stopped their organizations from using cloud services, have lifted temporarily some of the sanctions. So as an example, the BC government has declared a state of emergency. What has this done? They said, we will now allow for the broader use of things like Zoom, which we don't know where the data is stored, to basically be used by its public agencies and to allow some of that data to go and cross the border. We've seen the same thing in in the UK, where they're sitting here and looking at how do we go through and still continue to allow the services that might be run in the European Union, and as they're going through the Brexit, they're going to be challenged with this themselves, and be able to go through and address and use those services in whatever markets they act in, okay? So there's a couple of things that we always want to be aware of. If you're looking at this and restrictions are being lifted, it's only temporary. That means that as we start storing and start using some of these cloud applications, the things that we're going to need to basically be aware of is how are we going to repatriate that data set? Which components of the data are stored in country of residency? Which components of the data are stored in, say, the metadata that might be stored or stored across the border or in servers in a data center that we need to know where they are in order to make sure that we're compliant with the regulations we need to meet. While the regulations might be lifted in a state of emergency, it doesn't mean it's going to be there forever. And it's almost like we're letting the cat out of the bag. And now we're going to go through and having to decide exactly what we need to do in order to go through and address those moving forward. So let me talk a little bit, sorry, I'm just moving my mouse around here. And let's talk about a couple of things that we want to be addressing with respect to residency and security is still a concern. So I'm not intending to go through and talk a lot about how the issues are, the things that you want to consider. This is a quick, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you've got it as we go through this. But there's 4 key things that I always look at that we want to be aware of, that I think of under data residency and security. Number 1, the computer. The computer that you're using. I'm sitting at home right now using a desktop. I have a couple of laptops. Yep, I'm a techie, so I use a lot of gear. But what I have sitting up right up there is I have 2 firewalls that are locking down my connections, and they're not the ones that are provided by the telco. They're actually an additional firewall that protects my connection even more, and they're monitoring everything going on within this little micro network inside my home office. Why is that important? Because I want to know if somebody's trying to go through and get at my computers, because if I'm using my computers to access secure infrastructure for my clients, I want to make sure that my computers are also using a secure network firewall device as well inside that. So one of the things we want to always be aware of when we're dealing with our remote workers is what computers are they using? If you're using a computer, great, but maybe you're accessing some very secure systems in the office. You may be using a virtual private network to connect to them, but one of the things that you may want to be considering is how do I use a virtual desktop? So we have clients, as an example, where we run virtual desktops for their service providers and for their administrators, because they don't want their administrators accessing or administering their computer systems using a desktop that is not already secure. So we lock them down and we use virtual desktops. So that's part of the things that you want to consider around where the computers sit. Now, what about the servers? So when I'm using things like a cloud service like Salesforce, Office 365, or a business application like a utility billing system, the one key thing I always look at is where do the servers reside? Where are they processing the application? So Office 365, as an example, can now be resident in Canada. Okay, but has it always been the case? No, it hasn't. There's been cases where about 6 years ago or even 3 years ago, Office 365, all of the data resided in the United States for the Canadians. That means that when you stored a document under Office 365 SharePoint, it was stored on a server in the United States. So if you're a public sector agency, you're breaking the regulatory compliance issues right there. Okay, so where do the servers reside? So there's 3 kinds of servers I always think of. Where do the metadata servers reside? Where do your billing data reside? And where does the customer data reside? So even if you're using something like Office 365, the billing data still resides in the United States because that's where Microsoft goes through and bills you from. But the customer data now resides in Canada if you elect to go through and have your data residing here. So that's on the server side. Always be aware of where the application is running and what the servers are and where the servers are existing. Now, what about the applications? What applications are you using? So I always think of all the different apps that I use on a day-to-day basis. By the way, I have about 60 different user IDs that go into all these different applications. I do use a password manager. You want to figure out how to use single sign-on. But when you're thinking about the applications, can I be using an application that is a company or corporate system for utility billing? Is not existing in the cloud as a cloud service like Salesforce, but some of the applications like financials, like Workday, they exist on servers in the cloud, and those applications are now available so that you can use a browser to go access them and you can get in there. So those are the applications, those are the business applications we use, but a lot of cases now what we're finding is that departmental users are starting to use a lot more of the third-party apps like CRM systems like Salesforce, HubSpot. And whenever you're looking at those, you have to then ask those other two questions. What about the servers? What about the computers? And then the last thing I always think about with residency and security is, what about my collaboration tools? I use Skype sometimes. I use Zoom a lot. We're on Zoom right now. I use other types of Slack and other types of chatting applications. Question that we look at with all these collaboration tools is, where is the data moving? Are we using end-to-end encryption? When we go and type in a message in Slack, is that message encrypted? Is that message got confidential information in it? How do we go through and make sure that all of those collaboration tools that may be linking in and tying into our back-end applications are all secure and locked down? Things that you need to consider when we transit it. So when I look at all of that stuff, there's a couple of things I always like, and I'm going to I drew a little diagram to go and help explain some of the things that you want to consider. So there's my world of the new distributed workforce using cloud services securely. I've got a nice little home network. My home network, I use a fiber link. I actually have dual fiber at home, but there's a lot of customers that are, and a lot of remote users that are using what we use as an old legacy ADSL line. Digital subscriber line. It provides a lower end capacity, so it's got probably a little bit more of a lag when we're doing video conferencing and voice calling. And then we even have users that might be using mobile technology, wireless technologies down there where we have LTE and 4G. And we've got this emerging world of 5G technologies that are going to give us the speed of a fiber line, but using a wireless mobile device. All of those things connect into the internet. And when we're in that internet, we've got to go and find a way to transit from that internet and get us into our private network. Because what's hanging off our private network are all of our on-premise business applications that we're given. Then we've got this new world of cloud services that get deployed in multiple environments, but Zoom, as an example, resides on AWS. Office 365 is run out of Microsoft's Azure data centers. And then there is all of these old other providers. Facebook runs their own data centers. So they run their own dedicated environments. And then I sit here, and what I always look at whenever I'm using those cloud services, can I connect to them using a cloud on-ramp? Is there an environment and where I can link in my corporate network? Can I then transit from my home using a virtual private network or a virtual desktop and then be locked in on the right-hand side of that diagram so that I have a private secure environment? So we always want to consider, where's the metadata stored? What's metadata? It's the IP connection of the computer that's connecting into a cloud service, because they all track that. What about the customer user data? That's the data that usually an organization captures in order to go and bill you for the service you're using. It's your username, it's your user credential. Then there is the other one, which is the customer app data. And the customer application data is the content that you put into an application in the cloud. It's that customer name that goes into your CRM system. It's all those contacts for all of those people in the CRM. It's the utility billing information of all of your users and all of your assets. It's all of the SCADA data that comes from your real-time control systems. That's all the customer app data. The key question is everything in blue there is going to raise a question for you, is how do I repatriate that data once I am no longer under the COVID I'm no longer under the COVID opportunity and saying I'm opening up the privacy rules. That means that everything in that orange, or sorry, that green, has to come back to Canada. As an example, if you're under Canadian rules, has to come back to Europe if you're under the European GDPR rules. The pink is the stuff that people have said, okay, we've got new legislation that is allowed for certain metadata to go south of the border, and with consent, it can store customer user data. Your credentials as an administrator get into a system. So the key things you want to consider in this diagram are, for that home, do I really want my home user using their home PC, or should they be using a virtual desktop? When they're connecting in from home, should they be using their desktop? And if they are, should they be using a virtual private network? Are they using multi-factor authentication, and are they using a single sign-on infrastructure that's using their company credentials? When they're in the field as a mobile user, are they using that same technology as well? How are they transiting that crazy world of the internet and getting into this private network where they actually want to go and access all the cloud services in a secure, private manner, including their on-premise applications? So things you can do to do that: implement virtual desktops, implement virtual private networks, allow you to use some sort of a cloud on-ramp. Fuse Forward, we've actually developed one of those. We call it Fuse Secure, and it provides that whole cloud on-ramp and secure method to go and bring home users and mobile users to transit that internet to get into the secure network connections. So let's look at a little bit right now of some of the things that we want to do around data residency. And let's return back to data residency instead of just the connectivity. If you want to go through and start using the cloud services, most government and most cloud service providers targeting the public sector in Canada are now going after and providing availability of AWS in the zones in Canada. So that means you can actually start storing your cloud data in AWS on data centers in Montreal. That means that we are now meeting the requirements of data residency within the country. We also are seeing more and more cloud nodes being deployed inside countries to facilitate government usage of cloud services so that they can store private data inside the country. My key question right now is, do you really want to move your health records south of the border and have them sit on records on servers in the United States, where the Patriot Act allows the United States government to go and look at your records, your x-rays, your medical files? I don't. I want them residing in a private cloud environment, in a private record where I can basically go and give consent, where I know that somebody is taking care of the security and the residency of my data sets. So those are things that you want to consider. The other things that we're starting to see emerging right now in data residency is the emergence of what we call hybrid cloud solutions. So what's a hybrid cloud? A hybrid cloud is a set of servers and network gear and storage infrastructure that can be deployed inside a province, in a data center, or even inside your home to contain data that you want to basically have your own encryption keys on or be very close to, so that you're knowing that it's there, and it's going to address the issues of performance to go and do lots of data collection, lots of data manipulation, but it's also there so that it's not necessarily residing in a central repository in a cloud service provider. Now, things like Microsoft have got their cloud nodes, but we also see AWS has released the Outpost. And the Outpost is a device that will sit in a data center in Canada or in British Columbia that can tie back and use the services available in Montreal. And that gives you a hybrid environment to go through and do that. Those will also help you achieve the data residency requirements, where as we start moving towards more and more data residency being within province, we're going to be looking to go through and do that within this environment and within BC when we want to repatriate some of our data from other data centers after the crisis is over. And hopefully, crisis is going to come. We're looking at a window over the next 4, 6, 12 weeks, but it could be launching into 6 months. And we want to be considering not just what we're doing to solve it today, but also how we're going to go through and follow up in the future, and how we're going to repatriate our data back into the data residencies in which we are required to once these new legislative changes have come back and are no longer valid. I want to open it up to questions. Hopefully this has been a little bit of some quick informative information of things I consider. Not trying to go through and overwhelm with data, so hopefully you've got a few tidbits from this. Any questions from the floor? Carla, you want to share?
Yeah, I'm just having a look. We haven't got any questions come through right now, but just while we're waiting, I know it takes a little bit of time sometimes. Edric has just posted a link to a PDF that we have available that is more specific to data residency and how to achieve it within Canada. And I'm interested to know if you're not in Canada and you have questions, you're also welcome to reach out to us. I have one here. Any thoughts on the US Cloud Act?
So the US is, if you probably are well aware, the US Cloud Act, one of the things that they are doing at this point in time is, you've probably heard of the JEDI project. And the US has already got a GovCloud right now, which is allowing them to go through and run all of their cloud workloads already in private cloud environments for the US government. So their part of their rule is they're allowing that to go through and already run their workloads in dedicated data centers for that. When you're down in the US right now, they basically have a lot of capacity already to run their cloud workloads down there in that environment already. And there is still a little bit of protection of the data sets, and we still have to be aware that when you're dealing with the big accounts right now, like the Facebooks, they're still only subject to certain privacy rules on that today.
Great. Another question. In your experience, are US companies willing to delete any traces of your data once you repatriate the data? Does right to erasure apply to them?
No, it doesn't, not in the US. Unless they're trying to go through and stay in compliance with right to forget, which is under the GDPR rules. So as an example, they have what they call a self-selected approach, which is the American companies can say, I am compliant with GDPR, at which case they have to have that rule that says to the Europeans that they give you the right to forget. Doesn't mean they have to do it out of the US data centers. It's basically aligning as to the jurisdiction that you're in. So you've got to basically, a lot of cases, what's going on right now is if you want to then sue the American companies, you can't do it in America. You have to go into a jurisdiction in which they are actually subject to compliance, like Ireland or somewhere in the European market.
Great. And another question here. Would there be any downtime or disruption when we repatriate our data back to Canada once the data laws are back to normal?
Will there be downtime? It depends upon how you bring all of that data back into the country. So question is going to be is, what data services am I using? So am I using a service where I'm storing documents, and do I even know what applications that all of my remote staff are using right now? They may be looking and setting up some collaboration in a tool like Basecamp for project collaboration. We don't even know what they're storing. So when they start repatriating, it could be that because the security and the compliance officers are not monitoring what's going on their home desktops, they don't even know that data exists. Would there be some downtime? Potentially, but there would also be disruption if some of those users are now saying, well, how do I get the data back, and how am I actually paying for those services?
Great. And I just have one additional question in regards to Zoom itself. Like you mentioned earlier, a lot of people are using Zoom. There's potential for that data to be recorded and stored in the cloud. What would you recommend to companies that have become reliant on Zoom during this time?
Basically, for all those people that are part of Zoom right now, what I would be doing and using Zoom, I would say start incorporating a video conferencing service into your whole way that you operate. We run our own town hall meetings now using Zoom. Is a great way for a distributed team to keep in touch. And it doesn't force people to go through and attend a whole bunch of meetings. It allows you to go through and do things a lot quicker, get everybody the information quick. I also am very much a strong proponent of chat functions like Slack as part of that, and incorporate that into part of your corporate communications. One part is there is new versions coming out which are private editions of things like Zoom, where you can use your own in private cloud-based video conferencing services that would be in your own private network, as opposed to using a public version like a Zoom. And you're just going to start seeing, my prediction, you're going to start seeing more and more of that emerging, because people are going to start getting used to using these kind of technologies, but they're going to want to use it using a virtual private network or a secure connection instead of a public internet connection.
Great. Thanks. Well, it looks like we've come to the end of our questions, which isn't to say that people can't still send them in. Edric has posted a link to our data residency PDF for people that want further information. He's also about to post a link to, and you can see it on the screen here, to subscribe to future editions of the webinar. So we'll be running this every 2 weeks. It'll be a deep dive on specific topics related to remote workforce, technology, the cloud. So feel free to subscribe. We'd love to see you again. And also in the meantime, if you have specific questions that you want us to answer in a future series, just drop us an email. So I'm putting my email here in the chat. So yeah, send your questions through to me and we'll look at seeing what we can do in the future. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us. And I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Look forward to continuing our series. Talk soon.
Thanks. Bye.